Welcome to Midnight Rain Tales. The world sleeps, and the rain begins to whisper. In this quiet hour, stories drift through the night air, soft, chilling, unforgettable. Here, under the midnight sky, we share the tales the rain refuses to forget. Stay close and listen. "8:47 post-meridium, the unblinking eye of the lobby camera etched my ingress into the Meridian Tower's digital chronicle. I know this, having replayed the spectral dance of those moments countless times, a futile exorcism of memory. The timestamp burned into the corner shows Julian Vance, briefcase clutched like a shield, navigating the imposing glass doors, bound for the 23rd floor. The contract, carelessly forgotten, demanded retrieval, an ascent I never completed. Too many hours sacrificed at the altar of work. Eleanor's parting words echoed in the cavernous space. Tonight, perhaps, was the final, bitter proof. The cleaning crews had departed, leaving their sharp chemical signature hanging in the air, a scent that always made my sinuses clench. My solitary footfalls caromed off the polished travertine, each click a small intrusion in the cathedral hush. Sal's station sat vacant, a leather chair still holding the faint impression of occupancy, his rounds likely underway, or perhaps a brief respite in the washroom. No matter, my keycard granted passage. The document was the sole objective. Lobby illumination softened to its nocturnal dimness, punctuated by the crimson insistence of emergency exit signs, bleeding streaks across the walls. My leather-soled shoes tapped a lonely rhythm towards the bank of elevators, a quartet of monolithic steel portals standing sentinel. I summoned a lift. The third from the left answered with an immediate soft chime, its doors parting with a sigh of pneumatics. Stepping inside, the metallic tang mingled with antiseptic pine and the faint, greasy memory of someone's hurried meal. The doors sealed me in, mirroring a gaunt reflection, hollowed eyes silver dusting my temples, the slack knot of my tie, the livery of a man consumed by billable hours, a recently minted divorcee. The indicator climbed. 4, 5, 6. Then it arrived, that primal static prickling the nape of the neck, an ancient instinct screaming presence. Not a sound, not a breath, but a chilling certainty of proximity. It materialized somewhere between the 6th and 7th floors. My gaze, against my will, flickered to the polished steel. Behind my reflected self, slightly offset, stood a silhouette. Tall, clad in what appeared to be a dark suit, motionless. A swift, disbelieving turn. Only vacant air and the low thrum of the ascending car greeted me. I blinked, focusing again on the mirrored surface. The figure persisted. Dark suit, standing erect, utterly still. Yet, when I physically pivoted, whipping my head around, the car remained undeniably empty. Just Julian Vance, his briefcase, and the hum of machinery pulling him skyward. My heart began a frantic tattoo against my ribs. A clammy dew broke across my forehead. I retreated, pressing myself into the corner, my eyes darting between the tangible emptiness behind me and the impossible reflection that held its ground. Floor 12. The reflected entity hadn't shifted. Details sharpened. Masculine build, broad across the shoulders, head canted slightly downward. The suit, black or perhaps the deepest navy. Hands hung limply at its sides. But the elevator itself, the space I occupied, remained stubbornly, terrifyingly vacant. Panic tightened its icy fist around my lungs. My fingers, clumsy with sudden dread, fumbled for the control panel. Escape, immediate egress became the sole imperative. But as my hand reached for the button corresponding to the next floor, the ambient warmth bled away. A frigid wave washed over me, stealing breath as if a portal to some arctic void had opened beside me. Phantom plumes formed in the air before my face. Floor 15. I jabbed repeatedly at the button for 16, my fingers striking with mounting desperation. The elevator offered no concession, no deceleration. The digital display climbed relentlessly. 16, 17, 18. In the mirror world, the figure's head pivoted with excruciating slowness. It lifted degree by agonizing degree, presenting its face towards my reflection. A primal urge screamed at me not to look. I squeezed my eyes shut, yet the sense of its presence intensified. The cold deepening, setting my teeth to chattering uncontrollably. When I forced my eyes open, the reflection held the full horror. A visage of bleached parchment skin, ocular voids blacker than pitch, a mouth stretched into a soundless rictus of emptiness. Behind me, still nothing but cold, empty air. A strangled cry tore from my throat, reverberating in the glacial confines. My briefcase tumbled forgotten to the floor as I hammered the impassive steel, shouting for a help I knew wouldn't come. The elevator ascended. 19, 20, 21. In the reflection, the presence advanced 2 steps, drawing impossibly near. Its mirrored form stood directly behind mine now, those vacant sockets fixed on my reflected face. The cold had become a physical weight, unbearable. Numbness crept into my fingers. Each inhalation was a shard of ice in my lungs. Floor 22, 1 floor remaining. Deliverance felt simultaneously imminent and infinitely distant. In the mirrored space, a hand, long-fingered and corpse-pale with nails that looked black under the fluorescent glare, began a slow ascent towards my shoulder. I saw every horrifying detail in the steel, yet on my actual shoulder I felt nothing. Only that profound, bone-leeching chill. A chime. Floor 23. The doors, agonizingly slow, began their slide. I didn't wait for a full opening, throwing myself through the nascent gap the instant it was wide enough, abandoning the briefcase. I fled down the darkened corridor, dress shoes skidding precariously on the slick floor. I slammed into the exit door, plunging into the stairwell, taking steps 2, 3 at a time, nearly tumbling headlong in my frantic descent. 23 flights fueled by raw adrenaline, lungs searing, legs burning. I burst into the lobby, a disheveled, hyperventilating wreck in a rumpled suit. Sal, now returned to his post, jumped at my sudden wild-eyed apparition. "Mr. Vance, you all right?" Words failed me. A shaking finger pointed towards the elevators. Understanding dawned, or perhaps just professional concern. Sal grabbed his heavy flashlight and strode over. As he approached, the 3rd lift chimed obligingly, its doors sliding open to reveal only my abandoned briefcase sitting forlornly in the center of the empty car. Later, Sal and I huddled over the security console, the playback stark and chilling. Frame by frame, my entry, my solitary boarding of the elevator. The interior camera depicted a lone man, me, recoiling into a corner, screaming at empty air, clawing at the doors like a caged animal. Yet, superimposed on the feed, the temperature display, clinically objective, chronicled an undeniable plunge from a comfortable 72 degrees Fahrenheit down to a frigid 34 during my ascent. My resignation landed on my supervisor's desk the following morning. Corporate litigation felt impossibly trivial, hollowed out by the night's encounter. Now, sanctuary is my home office. Simple wills, property deeds provide my livelihood. Stairs are my penance, my preferred mode of vertical travel. Weeks later, excavating digital detritus from my old work email, I unearthed an overlooked message from building management. A historical footnote circulated for the Meridian Tower's 50th anniversary, previously ignored amidst the deluge of corporate communications. A single paragraph resonated like a tuning fork struck against bone. 1989, a partner from a rival firm, consumed by late hours and despair, had chosen the third elevator shaft, that shaft, for his final descent. They found him, clad in his suit, at the bottom. Now, dusk dictates the closure of my laptop. Reflections remain suspect territories, potential apertures into something else. Was it his ghost, that chilling passenger? Or merely a mimic, borrowing tragedy's shape to manifest? Perhaps polished surfaces, steel, glass, even standing water, are thinner membranes than we perceive. Portals for entities that watch from the periphery, sometimes drawn to the solitary and the overworked, adrift in hollow structures after dark. When the veil thins, the truth remains elusive, fundamentally undesired. What I retain, etched into my psyche, is the visceral memory, the glacial air, the reflection's ghastly autonomy, the spectral hand reaching, not touching, but promising contact. Meridian Tower is forbidden ground, a place I mentally cordon off. Mirrors wear shrouds in my home after twilight. Yet sometimes in the deep quiet of night, the old static returns, that prickle of awareness on my neck, the subtle theft of ambient warmth, the unshakable conviction of unseen company standing just behind me. I fight the instinct to verify, anchoring my gaze determinedly forward, because the lesson was learned in ice and terror. Never meet the eyes of what waits in the looking glass. Never acknowledge the silent companion who might stand beside you in the polished steel. Just keep your eyes fixed ahead and pray the doors open soon. Three weeks now since the first intrusion, a delicate crystalline cascade woke me at precisely 2:47 a.m. I recall the exact digits glowing on my phone's face. My first thought, a pre-dawn visitor rapping at the door. Then it returned, that distinct, ethereal music of metal kissing metal, somewhere just beyond my bedroom window pane. I rose, padding softly across the floorboards, expecting the neighbor's familiar wind sculpture pirouetting in some unseen nocturnal current. But there were no chimes, not mine, not theirs, not nestled in any shadowed corner of the adjacent properties, and the air itself was a vacuum, utterly still, unnaturally warm, heavy with the humid ghost of summer, despite October's advance across Connecticut. For 5 minutes I stood sentinel at the glass, listening. The sound had vanished. Back in the refuge of my bed, cocooned in darkness, I reasoned it away. Phantom noises, the settling groans of an old house cooling, ice shifting in the distant freezer. Yet beneath the rationalizations, certainty remained. I had heard chimes clear as struck glass. The following night, it recurred. 3:12 a.m. The same fragile argent susurrus, only now imbued with slightly more presence, a touch less distant. I was quicker this time, moving directly to the window, eyes straining against the inkwell dark. Nothing stirred. No breeze ruffled the sleeping leaves. No metallic forms glinted anywhere in sight. Yet the sound persisted, a delicate ringing that stretched for nearly 10 minutes while I stood rooted, scanning the void, a chill unrelated to the balmy air prickling my skin through the mesh screen. Daylight hours became reconnaissance missions. I surveyed every yard along our quiet street. Mrs. Albright, 2 houses down, possessed a set of ponderous copper tubes dangling from her porch eaves, instruments capable only of a deep, resonant boom, nothing like the high, clear notes haunting my sleep. No one else displayed any such ornaments. I expanded my search, circling the block, peering into accessible back gardens. Futile. Night 3 shattered the fragile peace at 1:55 a.m. The chimes arrived louder still, their proximity undeniable, seeming to emanate from just outside my window, perhaps inches from the glass. Fumbling for my phone, I activated its torch, casting a stark white beam into the familiar landscape of the yard. The light illuminated Alara's dormant herb garden, the weathered slats of the fence, the imposing silhouette of the maple tree, whose branches clawed possessively over our lawn. Nothing else. Yet the chimes sang on, a high, sharp canticle of metal on metal. Driven by a desperate need, I descended the stairs and slipped out the back door, clad only in boxers and a t-shirt. The sound gained startling clarity in the open air, undeniably originating from the vicinity of the maple. I advanced towards it, the phone's beam sweeping nervously left and right. With each footfall, the chiming intensified, swelled, until I stood directly beneath the tree, angling the light upwards into its dense canopy. Leaves, bark, empty air, that was all. And then, abruptly, silence crashed down. Absolute quiet reigned. For 20 minutes, I lingered beneath the maple's dark embrace, waiting, listening, but the spectral music did not return. I kept this nocturnal torment from Alara. Her own burdens, carried home daily from the pressures of her job, were weight enough. Adding my phantom chimes and sleeplessness seemed cruel, but the pattern cemented itself over the ensuing week. Night after night, sometime between the spectral hours of 1 and 3, the chimes would wrench me from sleep. Night after night, their song seemed louder, nearer. Night after night, my frantic searches yielded nothing but deepening frustration. Sleeping pills offered no sanctuary. The crystalline notes sliced through the induced chemical fog as if it were mere mist. I installed a security camera, its unblinking eye trained on the backyard theater of my distress. The recordings were chilling validation. Stark, empty footage devoid of movement or explanation, yet overlaid with the unmistakable, perfectly captured sound of the chimes, proving my sanity while simultaneously mocking my inability to find a source. 2 weeks bled into exhaustion. Sleep became a forgotten country. I'd lie rigid beside Alara's slumbering form, anticipating the inevitable summons. When the first notes sounded, I'd rise mechanically, resuming the futile patrol, knowing discovery was impossible, yet compelled to seek it. Daylight hours dissolved into a fugue state. At work, I became a ghost, haunting my own desk, errors blooming in my reports, my presence in meetings merely physical. My manager inquired, his voice laced with professional concern, if all was well domestically. I murmured assurances, the lie thin as tracing paper. Neighbors began casting sideways glances. My midnight excursions, flashlight beam probing the innocent trees, had not gone unnoticed. Mrs. Albright cornered Alara near the mailbox, asking with feigned solicitude if I was perhaps experiencing some difficulties. Alara's gaze, once merely tired, now held a new, sharp worry. She began suggesting doctors, therapists, speaking softly of anxiety, of depression. Last night, the haunting shifted its nature irrevocably. The chimes commenced at 2:23 a.m., not merely loud, but violently so, resonant enough to vibrate the window panes in their frames. I rose, an automaton answering its cue, moving towards the back door. Alara shifted beside me, a soft murmur escaping her lips, but sleep held her fast. My nightly wanderings had become a grimly accepted norm. Stepping outside, the sound struck me with physical force, a palpable wave far exceeding anything previous, imbued now with a sharp, almost wrathful quality to its metallic clangor. I walked toward the maple, the need for artificial light negated. An almost full moon presided, bathing the yard in an eerie argent glow. And then I saw them, suspended from the lowest, heaviest limb of the maple, swaying with impossible violence, hung a set of wind chimes utterly alien to me. A dozen or more long, slender silver tubes depended from a dark wooden disc. They thrashed against each other without a breath of wind to stir them, colliding with sufficient force to generate the intense, invasive ringing that had colonized my nights. I halted perhaps 10 feet shy of the tree, transfixed. As if sensing my observation, the chimes seemed to swing with even greater fury, their motion frantic, desperate. The sound escalated, becoming deafening, annihilating all other ambient noise. A vibration thrumming deep within my own chest cavity. Hesitantly, I took a step closer. Moonlight glanced off the polished metal, revealing intricate markings etched across their surfaces. Not letters, not numbers, but sigils, glyphs of a design utterly unfamiliar. They seemed to writhe and morph as the tubes swung, an optical illusion that made my eyes ache with the effort of focus. Another step. The wooden disc anchoring the chimes began to rotate, slowly at first, then accelerating, whipping the silver tubes into a blinding centrifugal blur. The pitch of the ringing altered, ascending to a piercing, needle-sharp frequency that resonated painfully within my skull. An inexplicable compulsion seized me, drawing my hand forward, reaching towards the nearest whirling tube. In that instant, just before contact, my gaze caught something dark, viscous, dripping from the underside of the spinning wooden disc. Thick, oily droplets fell, striking the grass below with an audible hiss. Where each drop landed, the blades instantly withered, blackened, died. I snatched my hand back, stumbling away from the possessed tree. The chimes spun faster still, their ringing achieving an impossible, unbearable shriek. The dark ichor now flowed freely, streaking down the silver tubes, spattering the ground beneath. Acrid smoke began to rise where it fell, carrying a stomach-churning stench reminiscent of scorched flesh. Turning, I fled back towards the house, slamming the door behind me, fumbling with the lock. Through the kitchen window, I watched, horrified. The chimes continued their lunatic gyration, their screaming song undiminished. The dark fluid had pooled, forming a perfect obsidian circle upon the lawn, a zone of absolute death where nothing grew, nor seemingly ever could again. That was 6 hours ago. Dawn has broken. Alara departed for work minutes ago, her parting glance steeped in an anxiety I could no longer dismiss when I mumbled about taking a sick day. I sit here now at the kitchen table, my gaze fixed on the maple tree through the window. The chimes hang quiescent in the flat morning light, yet beneath them the circle of dead grass remains, stark and black as powdered charcoal. What action can be taken? Leaving them is unthinkable. That substance, whatever its nature, annihilates life on contact. Yet the prospect of approaching them again fills me with a primal terror, a dread of the consequences should I attempt removal. The symbols etched into the silver are clearer now, in the revealing light of day. They stir a buried memory, something glimpsed decades ago in a dusty, forbidden volume within my grandfather's study shortly before his passing. He was a collector of esoteric manuscripts, curiosities unearthed from estate sales and shadowy antique shops. Most were theatrical nonsense, but one particular book, leather-bound, its script an indecipherable tongue, contained glyphs unnervingly similar to those now hanging from my tree. He'd discovered me poring over it, snatched it away with uncharacteristic fury, and locked it securely within his desk. The only instance I ever witnessed his anger flare. After his death, the book was gone. The drawer, when finally opened, was empty. The memory lay dormant until this moment, resurrected by the sight of those same arcane symbols scarring the silver tubes outside my window. A breeze stirs the morning air. The chimes begin to sway, gently at first, even in daylight. Their nascent sound sets my teeth on edge, and I see it, the dark liquid beginning to well and drip once more. Action is imperative. I must remove them, somehow neutralize them. Yet, as I sit here watching their slow, deliberate swing, a chilling conviction settles upon me. They will not permit it. They chose this tree, this ground, this house. They chose me. The circle of dead grass appears subtly wider than moments ago. The chiming grows, not yet loud, but insistent, and beneath the metallic tones, I fancy I can discern whispers, formless voices coalescing around my name. I must try. I will try. Thick work gloves, the extension ladder, heavy bolt cutters from the garage. My meager arsenal is assembled. If this chronicle receives no further entry, if my attempt fails, let this stand as testament. Let someone understand the sequence of events. The chimes are singing now. They sense my intention. They await my approach. I am walking toward the back door. The sunlight feels unnervingly cold upon my skin. The voices within the chimes sharpen, gaining clarity. They are speaking my grandfather's name. 21 days passed, the first handprint materialized. Not some incidental smear, no errant streak, but the flawless impress of a human palm, fingers splayed upon the silvered glass of my bathroom mirror. I recall the precise moment its image registered, for my heart seized, pausing utterly for 2 echoing beats. Dramatic, perhaps, yet undeniably true. My pulse stumbled, faltered as I stood there, water sheeting from my skin, towel cinched at my waist, confronting a thing that possessed no right to exist. I dwell alone. Apartment 4B, carved from the bones of a grand Victorian edifice in Boston's Back Bay, is my solitary domain. That Tuesday dawned indistinguishable from any other. A 6:30 awakening, the ritual of coffee, a cursory scan of emails, then the 7:15 immersion in the shower's heat, preparing for the day's demands. Steam billowed thick when I emerged, an expected consequence of hot water meeting confined space, the ventilation perpetually inadequate. Reaching for the hand towel, I swiped a clear circle onto the fog-cloaked mirror, intending to shave. And there it was, stark at eye level, a handprint, immaculate, pressed into the fleeting condensation. Larger than my own hand, its digits were elongated, slender, the palm unnaturally broad. Every crease, every whorl stood rendered with uncanny fidelity, as though placed against the glass with deliberate, measured force. I blinked, eyes stinging, then scrubbed the entire mirror clear with the towel. The print vanished. My immediate thought, hallucination, a trick of steam and shadow playing upon a weary mind. Yet, leaning close, scrutinizing the glass, I detected the faintest residue of oil, an ethereal signature exactly where the hand had rested. Someone, or something, had laid its touch upon my mirror. I verified the bathroom window latch. Secure as always. The sole entrance was the door through which I'd passed, and the apartment had held only me through the night's duration. My heart resumed its frantic rhythm, a frantic drum against my ribs as logic fractured. A nocturnal intruder? But to what end? To merely touch a mirror and depart, and bypassing deadbolts, the security system, without a whisper of alarm. That day, work received a fabricated excuse of illness. Hours bled away in a meticulous, near-forensic examination of my apartment, seeking any sign of violation. Locks were replaced. The building superintendent reviewed the corridor's security footage at my insistence. Nothing. The camera showed only my own departures and arrivals. Sleep that night was a shallow, brittle thing. Each groan of the old house jolted me upright. Compulsively, I checked the bathroom, half convinced I'd find a figure silhouetted against the porcelain. But the mirror remained placid, unmarred, my solitude unbroken. By morning's light, I'd almost persuaded myself it was a figment. Stress, surely, contorts perception. The investment firm demanded long hours. Sleep was a luxury seldom afforded. Perhaps a holiday was overdue. Then, precisely 1 week later, it recurred. The identical sequence, shower, steam, the wiping motion. This time, however, twin handprints adorned the glass, side by side, congruent in dimension and form to the first, pressed into the ephemeral moisture as if someone had stood before my mirror, leaning in, bracing themselves with both palms flat against the surface. Wiping them away felt futile. Instead, I fumbled for my phone, capturing images, my hands trembling so violently, the initial attempts blurred into incoherence. Upon achieving a clear shot, I examined it with obsessive intensity. The prints were exact duplicates down to the most minuscule lineation, suggesting the same hand applied twice with microscopic precision. It was then a detail surfaced that sent a chill coiling deep in my gut. At the center of each palm resided a perfect circle, roughly the diameter of a quarter coin. Not a feature of human anatomy. These circles possessed sharp, defined edges, seemingly penetrating the very substance of the hand, like apertures punched cleanly through the flesh. I forwarded the photographs to Julian Vance, my closest friend, affecting a casual tone. "Oddity in the bathroom, Jules. Thoughts?" His reply was swift. "Nice Photoshop, mate. Creepy." But no digital manipulation had occurred. The handprints were tangibly real, present in my bathroom, defying all rational explanation. My showers became abbreviated affairs thereafter, performed hastily. The bathroom door left conspicuously ajar. A small dehumidifier hummed constantly, striving to keep the mirror free of its revealing mists. For 2 weeks, an uneasy peace held. No further prints manifested. A fragile sense of relief began to bloom. Perhaps the presence, whatever its nature, had moved on. Until last night. Work had held me captive. I returned past midnight, bone-weary, eyes gritty with fatigue. Yet the need for a shower was primal, a necessity to sluice away the accumulated tension of a 14-hour day wrestling volatile markets and irate clientele. The cascade of hot water was a balm, dangerously soothing. I surrendered to it, losing myself beneath the spray, time dissolving. Steam gathered, thick and opaque, overwhelming the dehumidifier's quiet efforts. When at last I stepped out, the mirror was a solid sheet of white fog. I reached for the towel, poised to clear a space, and froze. The condensation felt wrong. Darker patches marred the uniform haze, areas where moisture clung differently, disturbed. As I watched, transfixed, these patches coalesced, resolving into shapes, handprints, dozens upon dozens, blooming sequentially across the mirror's expanse, like witnessing unseen hands, multiple hands, pressing against the glass from the other side, revealed in slow, inexorable motion. Each print was identical to the previous manifestations, each bearing those unnatural, perfect circles perforating the palms. Immobilized, breath caught in my throat, I stood dripping, a spectator to this impossible proliferation. Rivulets of condensation began to trace paths down the glass, lending the prints an illusion of sinister movement in the dim light. Then came the sound, a wet, dragging noise like damp skin sliding across glass, emanating from the mirror itself. Faint initially, it swelled, becoming rhythmic, insistent, as if something pressed repeatedly against the barrier, seeking purchase, seeking passage. The mirror's surface began to visibly ripple, not an optical illusion. The glass itself undulated, like water disturbed by unseen impacts. The handprints deepened, sinking further, transforming from mere impressions in steam to actual concavities in the reflective plane. Instinctively, I retreated, backpedaling until my shoulders met the cool tile of the far wall. The sliding grew louder, wetter. The hands pressed harder, burrowing into the glass. Fingers became discernible now. Three-dimensional forms extruding from the mirror's surface like pallid dough worked from behind. The first hand breached entirely, extending into the familiar space of my bathroom, long bone-white fingers grasping at the air. The skin possessed an unnatural smoothness, almost synthetic, punctuated by that flawless circular void through the palm. Through the hole, I could see the bathroom wall beyond. I fled. No thought of clothes, possessions, dignity. A primal surge propelled me from the bathroom, out of apartment 4B, into the hushed corridor. I hammered on my neighbor's door until Mrs. Albright appeared, draped in her nightdress, her expression shifting from drowsy confusion to alarm as she beheld me, naked, shivering, water pooling at my feet. "Please," The word tore from my throat. Call the police, someone's in my bathroom, something. The raw terror in my voice must have registered, bypassing her initial impulse to recoil, for she admitted me, lent me her telephone, mine abandoned in the flight, offered her late husband's voluminous bathrobe while the interminable wait for the authorities commenced. Their search was thorough, professional. They found nothing amiss save for the considerable quantity of water puddled on the bathroom floor, evidence of my interrupted shower. The mirror, utterly unremarkable. No prints, no ripples, no perforations. The officers maintained their composure, yet their glances conveyed unspoken conclusions. Intoxication, perhaps, or delusion. They advised sleep, suggested consulting a physician if the anxiety persisted. I am at Julian's now, committing this account to script, while the horror remains sharp, undiluted by time or doubt. He asked no questions upon my 2 a.m. arrival, simply prepared the sofa, offered a beer, granted indefinite sanctuary, but the knowledge resonates. Return is inevitable. Back to my apartment, back to face that silvered glass, because there is a detail I withheld, even from Julian, even from the police. As I backed away last night, in the split second before terror tipped into flight, I glimpsed something behind the questing hands. A face pressed close to the glass just as the hands had been. Smooth, featureless white, save for the twin vacancies where eyes should have been. Perfect circular holes, congruent with those in the palms. It saw me. An undeniable certainty settled within me. It saw me, and I know, with chilling intuition, that it remains there still, quiescent, waiting on the far side of my mirror, anticipating the next bloom of steam, awaiting my return. Hours I have sat here, marooned on Julian's couch, wrestling with the unanswerable. Dawn paints the window pane. Soon he will stir, inquire about my state, perhaps gently probe my readiness to confront whatever haunts my bathroom. How to articulate that every mirror now seems to shimmer at the periphery of my vision, that fleeting movements flicker in every polished surface, that earlier, using his own bathroom, I could have sworn ephemeral finger marks ghosted across the faucet's chrome gleam. My phone is a lifeline I clutch compulsively, scrolling through the photos of those initial handprints. They persist, stark evidence against the encroaching belief that I am unraveling. Yet, with each passing hour, the images themselves seem subtly altered. The hands appear to press deeper into the digital frame, the circular voids widening fractionally, and there, in the shadowed reflection within the mirror's captured image, a face seems to hover, infinitesimally closer than before. A vibration, a text from my supervisor querying my absence, another from my mother confirming Sunday dinner, mundane intrusions from a world operating under familiar laws, a world where mirrors merely reflect, handprints signify presence, and holes are simply voids. But that world is lost to me now, irrevocably altered by what I have witnessed, by the knowledge of what waits within every reflection, every sheet of glass, every polished metallic curve and tranquil pool of water. They are all portals now, apertures to elsewhere, and something on the other side has registered my awareness of it. Julian begins to move in his bedroom. Soon, questions will arise. Soon, a decision must be forged. For this moment, however, I remain anchored to his couch, observing the sunrise, deliberately averting my gaze from the dormant television screen across the room, averting my gaze from the faint ripple that seems to disturb its dark, glassy surface like unseen pressure from within, averting my gaze from the nascent marks materializing in its reflection, marks disturbingly akin to hands, hands bearing perfect circular holes through their centers. I squeeze my eyes shut, but the refuge is illusory, because the understanding has dawned, cold and absolute. The mirrors are not windows, they are doors, and I did not merely glimpse something beyond. I allowed it to glimpse me in return. It has been shadowing me ever since, migrating from reflection to reflection, drawing nearer with each encounter, awaiting the opportune confluence of steam and shadow and solitude, waiting to extend its grasp fully and draw me back, through the glass, to its side. I have been writing for hours, striving for fidelity, for clarity. The sun is ascendant. Julian is in the shower. The sound of running water carries faintly. Steam will be gathering in his bathroom now, clouding his mirror. Any moment he will emerge, wipe clear the condensation, and I must go, must warn him, must listen. Can you perceive it? That slick, sliding friction like skin adhering to glass? It originates from his laptop screen. This screen, the one upon which I type. Its surface darkens now, undulating like disturbed liquid, revealing marks that resemble, no, I must. The heat rippling off the tarmac ahead coalesced, distorting into something vaguely human, and a tremor ran through me. There, solitary upon the vacant ribbon of road, stood a figure, thumb sharply angled skyward. As our car devoured the distance, a fleeting impression registered, a face etched with exhaustion, eyes broadcasting a raw desperation. Beside me, Clara drew a sharp, involuntary breath. "Did you see him?" she whispered. I offered only a tight nod, my grip strangling the steering wheel, because I had, and some cold certainty within me knew we would see him again. That same wayfarer, leagues farther down this desolate highway, inexplicably preceding us. My name is Leo Sterling. What began as an ambitious cross-country pilgrimage with my wife, a celebration of 5 years wedded, spiraled rapidly into a waking hallucination defying all logic. Hours we'd driven, swallowed by the vast, indifferent expanse of the Nevada hinterlands. A panorama of baked earth and scrub, punctuated only by the skeletal remains of gas stations or forlorn roadside diners. San Francisco to the Grand Canyon, that was the plan, charting a course through the raw heart of the American Southwest. Those initial days possessed a sun-drenched charm. We'd belted out forgotten anthems, clawing their way through the radio static, indulged in childish travel games, watched the continent unfold outside our windows. But crossing into Nevada's immense vacancy, the tenor shifted. The air grew thick, weighted. The quiet became less peaceful, more predatory. Even the radio succumbed, surrendering to a persistent, abrasive hiss no amount of dial twisting could banish. Our first sighting of the traveler occurred perhaps an hour into that Nevada passage. He materialized abruptly, seemingly conjured from the shimmering air itself. A lone sentinel beside the asphalt, arm extended, gaze obscured by dark, inscrutable lenses. Hurtling past at 70, I snatched only fragments. Sun-scorched skin, a tire worn thin by time and elements, a rucksack bearing the scars of long journeys. "Should we have stopped?" Clara murmured, twisting against her seatbelt, her gaze fixed on the dwindling speck in the rearview mirror. I shook my head, the practiced response automatic. "You know the rules, love. Never stop for strangers, especially not out here, middle of nowhere." She acquiesced with a faint nod, yet unease lingered in the set of her mouth. "I hope he finds a ride. It's merciless out there." I mumbled reassurances about other drivers, about eventual deliverance, and pressed onward, but a disquiet, cold and heavy, had taken root deep within my gut. 20 minutes, perhaps less, slid by, and we saw him again. Identical posture, the same frayed garments, that same imploring stance. Utterly impossible. We'd maintained speed, relentless forward motion. No conceivable way existed for him to have overtaken us. "Leo," Clara began, her voice taut, threaded with disbelief. "Is that—" "It can't be," I countered, the denial tasting false even as I spoke it, because it was. Against all reason, against the very fabric of space and time as we understood it, the same man stood waiting. We swept past him once more. This time, his face came into sharper focus. Gaunt, the flesh drawn tight over bone, almost skull-like, and his eyes behind the concealing glass. Something profoundly wrong there. Too dark, unnervingly deep, like twin punctures into emptiness. Clara and I rode on in a thick, stunned silence, each mind grappling futilely for a rational explanation. A different man, uncannily similar, a shared delusion born of heat, monotony, fatigue. Yet beneath the frantic logic spinning, a shared, unspoken conviction resonated. Something was profoundly awry. The third appearance, scarcely 15 minutes later, tore a scream from Clara's throat. He wasn't beside the road this time. He stood squarely in the center of our lane, an unmoving obstacle directly in our trajectory. I slammed the brakes. Tires shrieked protest as the car slewed to a halt, mere feet from the impassive figure. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat audible in the sudden silence. Clara's knuckles shone white where she gripped the dashboard. The hitchhiker remained motionless, regarding us through those impenetrable sunglasses. Then, with excruciating slowness, he lifted a hand, index finger extending, pointing directly at us. "Oh God, Leo," Clara whimpered, her voice fragile. "What do we do?" The question echoed my own internal chaos. Every primal instinct shrieked to jam the car into reverse, to flee this apparition as fast as metal and gasoline could carry us. Yet a morbid fascination, a desperate need to comprehend, held me paralyzed. Hesitantly, I powered down my window. A blast of furnace-hot air rushed in, carrying with it an odor that defied easy description. Decay, perhaps, the scent of something long dead left to desiccate under the relentless sun. "What do you want?" My voice emerged thin, inadequate against the vast surrounding emptiness. His mouth moved, forming shapes, but the sound that issued forth was inhuman. It resembled radio static, a harsh crackle interwoven with clicks and whirring noises that raised the hairs on my neck, and then, abruptly, he was gone. Not run off, not dissolved into the heat haze. Simply absent, present one instant, utterly vanished the next. Clara and I stared at each other, faces pale, bodies trembling. Did that just happen? She breathed, the words barely audible. I could only nod, incapable of speech. My thoughts churned, desperately seeking purchase on the impossible event, but no sense could be made. It violated every known law, every tenet of reason. With hands that shook, I shifted the car back into drive, easing forward. We drove in a heavy quiet, adrift in private terror, startled by every dancing shadow, every distant shimmer on the horizon. As the sun bled towards the western rim, painting the desert in violent hues of orange and bruised purple, a small diner materialized beside the road, its neon sign flickering bravely against the encroaching dusk. By silent, mutual consent, I steered into the gravel lot. We both craved respite, a moment to gather our frayed nerves, perhaps locate a sliver of normalcy within the comforting ritual of coffee and pie. The diner was sparsely populated. A pair of truckers hunched over the counter, an elderly man occupying a booth by the window, lost in contemplation. We slid into worn vinyl seats. A waitress approached, her name tag reading Martha. "Get you folks something?" she inquired, pen hovering above a small notepad. We ordered coffee, pie. As Martha turned away, the words tumbled out of me, unbidden. "Ever hear any strange stories about this highway stretch?" Martha paused mid-stride, turning back, a slight frown creasing her brow. "Strange how?" I hesitated, wrestling with how to phrase the unphrasable without sounding utterly unhinged. Like things that can't be explained, people seeing phenomena. A flicker crossed Martha's features, concerned certainly, but tinged with something akin to recognition. Her gaze swept the quiet diner, then she leaned towards our booth, lowering her voice. "You saw him, didn't you?" she whispered. "The traveler?" Clara gasped softly beside me. A chill, sharp and distinct, traced its way down my spine. "You know about him," I managed. Martha gave a solemn nod. "He's been walking this road longer than anyone can rightly recall. Some folks say he's the restless spirit of a man who perished out here, forever seeking a ride he never got. Others whisper he's different. Not from around here, if you catch my meaning." She straightened abruptly, her expression shuddering. "Just local superstition, mind you. Tall tales. Bet whatever you saw was the heat playing tricks. This desert messes with your head." With a brisk efficiency, she bustled off toward the kitchen. Clara and I sat shell-shocked, the waitress's words hanging heavy in the air. "Leo," Clara said finally, her voice trembling slightly, "I want to go home. Forget the canyon. I need to get out of this place." I nodded, reaching across the table, my hand covering hers. "First light," I promised. "We'll find a motel, hole up for the night, head back towards California at dawn." Even as I spoke, a corrosive doubt gnawed at me. Would escape be that simple? Would he permit us to leave? We consumed our pie mechanically, each submerged in grim speculation. As I settled the bill at the counter, I noticed the old man in the window booth observing us, his gaze unnervingly steady. Turning to leave, his voice, raspy with age, snagged us. "Can't outrun him, you know." he stated, not unkindly. Once he's marked you, there's no getting away. I felt Clara stiffen beside me. What do you mean? I asked, though a part of me screamed against knowing more, against inviting further darkness. The old man's rheumy eyes met mine. He ain't looking for no ride, son. He's hunting a replacement, someone to take over his watch on this God-forsaken piece of highway so he can finally pass on. Ice seemed to form in my veins. How do you know this? A melancholy smile touched the man's weathered lips. Been running from him 40 years myself. Ever since the night I drove right on past him thinking I was being smart, playing it safe. He turned his gaze back to the window, scanning the deepening twilight outside. No escaping him, he repeated softly, almost to himself. Don't matter how far you drive, how fast, he'll be there, waiting until you give in, or find someone else to take your place. Clara tugged urgently at my sleeve, her eyes wide pools of fear. Leo, let's go, please. I nodded, guiding her numbly towards the exit. As we stepped out into the cooling desert night, the old man's pronouncement echoed relentlessly in my mind. Can't outrun him. We drove into the darkness, pushing the car hard, exceeding the limit, both of us flinching at every roadside shadow, every trick of the weary eye. Yet, regardless of the speed, irrespective of the miles devoured, the sensation of being pursued, of being watched, clung to us like the oppressive desert dust. And each time my gaze flickered to the rearview mirror, I braced myself, half expecting to see a skeletal silhouette materialize in the back seat, offering a rictus grin full of too many teeth, poised to claim his due. The highway stretched before us, an endless black ribbon unfurling into infinity, and I knew with a certainty that froze my very soul. Our journey was terrifyingly far from concluded. The traveler was out there, patient, waiting, and sooner or later, inevitably, we would have to face him again. I recall the precise instant the woods were rendered mute. Ensconced within my tent, the zipper's rasp having just sealed me in for the night, an abrupt and profound stillness descended. This wasn't the familiar quietude of encroaching darkness. It was an absolute vacuum of sound, as though the breeze, the rustling leaves, the chittering insects, even the distant murmur of the creek had entered a sudden conspiratorial pact of silence. I, Elias, had sought this remote enclave for solace, a flight from the city's clamor, believing a solitary weekend beneath the colossal pines might cleanse my thoughts. Instead, a leaden dread settled in my gut. The sole sound left was the frantic percussion of my own breath. Too quick, too shallow, a desperate rhythm against my eardrums. My sleeping bag hissed softly against the nylon floor as I shifted. A rational explanation clawed at the edges of my mind. Perhaps a predator prowled nearby, silencing the smaller denizens of the forest. Yet, when I held my own breath, straining to listen, the void remained absolute. No owl's call, no scuffle in the undergrowth, nothing. Then arrived the footfalls, a heavy, measured tread circling the flimsy perimeter of my tent. The rhythm was too deliberate for deer, the weight too evenly distributed for bear. Each thud sent a tremor through the fabric walls. I lay paralyzed, sweat pooling at the base of my spine, palms slick, the fine hairs along my arms erect. My fingers fumbled for the torch beside my sleeping bag. Its weak beam, when finally activated, offered scant comfort, illuminating only the thin nylon shell that separated me from the unknown. A word tried to form, but my throat had seized. Seconds stretched into an eternity before I managed a strangled whisper. "Is anyone there?" Silence answered. The footsteps paused. My heart hammered against my ribs, and the immense quiet pressed in again, heavier than before. Rigid, face mere inches from the canvas, I listened. Then the tread resumed, circling once more, palpably closer. A surge of desperate energy propelled me. I tore open the tent's zipper, thrusting the torch beam into the oppressive dark. Light splashed across moss-slicked tree trunks, damp ferns, and some 30 feet distant, the stark silhouette of the dilapidated cabin I'd noticed earlier that afternoon. The structure, with its partially collapsed roof and single grime-coated window, had intrigued me upon arrival, a relic swallowed by time. I hadn't ventured near it then, preferring the known quantity of my own gear. Now its skeletal form beckoned, a strange promise of sanctuary. Surely solid wood offered more defense than mere canvas. Yet the beam revealed no intruder, only empty space saturated with a palpable presence, an invisible weight constricting my lungs. I scrambled out, my knees meeting the damp earth. Breath plumed in ragged clouds before me. The footfalls ceased abruptly, yet the sensation of being watched intensified, a prickling awareness across my skin. Keeping the torch aimed low, wary of provoking whatever stalked the perimeter, I hastily gathered my meager possessions. The backpack containing clothes, a water bottle, a small utility knife. Every few steps I cast frantic glances over my shoulder. Still nothing stirred. Still no sound disturbed the unnatural calm. I forced myself toward the cabin, navigating the barely discernible path through the underbrush. The cabin door felt cold, sodden beneath my touch. I worked the latch. It surrendered with a protracted squeal that echoed painfully loud in the night air. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of stale air, mildew, and decaying leaves. The torch beam skittered across a rough-hewn table, the fractured remains of 2 chairs, and, leaning against the far wall, a large, ornate mirror. A mirror? Here, in this forgotten corner of the wilderness? Its frame was a tangle of elaborate carvings, shapes suggesting grasping branches or coiling vines, perhaps. The glass itself was murky, tarnished with age spots like tiny black constellations. Shoving a broken chair aside, I pulled the door shut behind me. My heart still thrashed, but the solid wood at my back offered a sliver of security. I slid down the wall, focusing on slowing my breathing, drawing in the musty air in quiet, deliberate gasps. 2 nights. That had been the plan. 2 nights to purge the anxieties accumulated back home, the lost job, the relentless arguments with Maya about dwindling finances. This solo pilgrimage had felt essential, a necessary isolation to recalibrate, to rediscover what truly mattered. Now I would trade anything for the crackle of her voice on a phone line, the distant, comforting glow of a neighbor's window. The solitude I'd craved had become a terrifying, absolute loneliness. The silence persisted, broken only by the frantic pulse drumming in my ears and the faint crinkle of my jacket with every minute movement. After several minutes that felt like hours, I decided to secure the entrance. I dragged one of the decrepit chairs, then a small splintered wooden chest, wedging them against the door. Fortified, I turned my attention and my wavering torchlight back to the cabin's interior. If this was to be my refuge until dawn, I needed to know its secrets. The beam traced the rough log walls, gaps chinked with crumbling moss. On a dilapidated shelf lay a rusted lantern, a length of brittle rope, and a scattering of papers ravaged by damp. Faint script adorned one sheet, but the ink had bled into illegibility. I could decipher only fragments, speculum unsafe, and something resembling only reflection. A cold dread snaked through me. Unsafe? The mirror? My gaze snapped towards it, the knot in my stomach tightening. Viewed closer, the frame's carving seemed more intricate, sinister patterns hinting at snarling visages if stared at too long. My legs felt unsteady, but I compelled myself towards it. I raised the torch, directing its beam onto the clouded surface. My reflection swam dimly into view, but it looked wrong. An effect of the angle? The tarnished glass? Perhaps. Yet my shoulders seemed unnaturally narrow, my eyes hollowed sockets. Instinctively, I reached out to wipe the glass clean. As my fingertips brushed the cool surface, a peculiar static-like tingle shot up my arm. I recoiled, stumbling backward. Simultaneously, a faint creak sounded from outside the cabin walls. I extinguished the torch, instantly pressing myself flat against the logs. Breath held captive in my chest. My body trembled uncontrollably, fear now an involuntary physiological response. Long moments stretched. No further sound came. Hesitantly, I switched the torch back on. The mirror. This time, the reflection revealed something standing behind me, a shadowed form, barely discernible, lurking in the far corner of the room. I spun around, light beams slashing through the empty space. Nothing. The corner held only dust motes dancing in the beam. My head throbbed. Was my mind fracturing under the strain? Stress, I knew, could conjure phantoms. Yet the certainty of having seen something lingered, cold and sharp. I felt observed, scrutinized. Every nerve ending screamed that I was not alone in this decaying structure. I backed away from the mirror, moving towards the single grimy window. Peering through, I saw only impenetrable darkness and the vague shapes of trees. Suddenly, a soft thud resonated against the cabin wall beside me, as if something heavy had leaned against the exterior logs. I froze, the torch shaking violently in my grip. Another thud, then silence reclaimed the space. My throat constricted. Galvanized by a surge of desperate courage, I struck a match from my emergency kit and lit the rusted lantern I'd found. It sputtered to life, casting a weak, flickering amber glow that did little to dispel the gloom. The shadows it threw writhed and danced, animating the mirror's carved frame, making the wooden vines seem to pulse with a life of their own. I sought rest, settling in the corner diagonally opposite the door, the lantern placed protectively at my feet. For a time, nothing disturbed the quiet. Sleep felt impossibly distant, my thoughts racing in frantic circles, but a fragile calm began to settle. I glanced at my watch. Midnight had bled into the early hours. Survival meant enduring until first light. Only then could I risk flight. I reached again for the decaying papers, hoping for a clearer clue. Most were lost to time and moisture, but one scrap yielded more words. Reflected footsteps. When forest falls silent. Barely legible, yet the implication resonated. The unnatural quiet was a known harbinger. It signaled the proximity of something, and that something was intrinsically linked to the mirror. The phrase, "no escape through the eyes of the mirror," was scrawled faintly near the tattered edge. Nonsensical, yet chilling. My pulse accelerated. Was the mirror a portal, a trap, a lure? Each time my gaze inadvertently drifted towards it, I felt an unnerving pull, a subtle invitation to step closer, to peer deeper into its clouded depths. Without preamble, the footsteps returned, this time directly outside the cabin door. A slow, dragging scrape followed by another. My chest tightened, breath catching. I clutched the torch in one hand, the small knife in the other, forcing myself into absolute stillness, aware of the betraying loudness of my own respiration. The lantern flame dipped and wavered. My eyes were drawn, against my will, back to the mirror. In its murky glass, I saw the cabin door swing slowly inward. My head snapped towards the actual door. It remained firmly shut, barricaded by the chair and chest. Back to the mirror. The reflected door stood wide open now, framing a tall, indistinct shape that loomed on the threshold, its form obscure, nightmarish. My heart hammered against my ribs. A faint, metallic odor touched the air, reminiscent of old blood or rust. Tears pricked my eyes. This couldn't be happening. I sought my own reflection, finding a pale, sweat-streaked visage staring back. But over my reflection's shoulder, emerging from the shadowed corner behind me in the glass, a long hand, skeletal and gray, extended slowly towards me. I whipped around, knife brandished, slicing through empty air. Again, nothing tangible occupied the space. Nausea rose in my throat. Dizziness washed over me. This mirror wasn't reflecting reality. It was layering something else onto the scene. Echoes of the past, spectral entities, figments from some other twisted dimension. I didn't understand its nature, only that the terror it evoked felt intensely real, perhaps even desired by whatever presence haunted this place. The encompassing silence, the heavy tread, maybe they emanated from the mirror or were drawn to it. No signal reached my phone here. No help could be summoned. Dawn was my only hope. If I could endure until sunrise, I could run. Time became molasses. I tried to avert my gaze from the mirror, focusing instead on the barricaded door, the sound of my own strained breathing. But the looking glass exerted a malignant magnetism. Inevitably, my eyes drifted back and saw my reflection smile, while my own mouth remained clamped shut in terror. The lips in the mirror curled upward, baring teeth in a silent rictus. My blood ran cold. I watched, horrified, as my reflection's eyes shifted, looking pointedly at something behind my actual position. This time I refused to turn, beads of cold sweat tracing paths down my neck. The lantern sputtered, its light faltering. The metallic scent intensified, acrid in my nostrils. Fear was a tangible dryness coating my tongue. A sudden, overwhelming panic seized me. The mirror. It had to be the source, the catalyst, feeding the horror, perhaps projecting it. I had to cover it. Snatching up an old burlap sack I'd noticed near the chest, I advanced towards the ominous artifact. Each step felt leaden, my legs dragging as if wading through viscous fluid. The reflection contorted, showing my limbs twisted at unnatural angles. I forced myself onward, heart pounding with painful intensity, threatening to burst from my chest. Raising the burlap sack high, I threw it over the mirror, draping the coarse fabric across its ornate frame. The instant contact was made, a thin, piercing shriek echoed from outside, faint, distant, yet unmistakable. Then the silence returned, but subtly altered, heavier somehow, pregnant with waiting. I stood frozen, knife still gripped tightly, anticipating something. Minutes crawled by. The lantern's flame steadied, burning with a calm, unwavering flicker. Slowly, cautiously, I retreated from the shrouded mirror, settling once more near the door. My limbs trembled violently. The salty tang of sweat was sharp on my lip. I had confronted it, perhaps not vanquished it, but resisted its power to inflict those terrifying visions. Dawn arrived not as a sudden burst, but as a slow dilution of the oppressive blackness pressing against the window pane. In the faint, gray pre-light, I dismantled my barricade. Before stepping out, I cast one final glance at the mirror, still hidden beneath the burlap shroud. As I emerged onto the forest floor, my gaze fell upon a muddy puddle near the cabin step. For a fleeting, stomach-lurching second, my reflection in the water seemed wrong, the eyes too sunken, too hollow. I blinked hard, and the image corrected itself, becoming just my own tired, rain-spattered face. Distant birdsong tentatively stitched the air back together. Nature was hesitantly resuming its chorus, but my psyche felt fractured, scraped raw by the night's ordeal. I hiked out with desperate speed, resolutely refusing to look back towards the cabin nestled amongst the pines. Hours later, finally enclosed within the mundane safety of my car, I felt a persistent clamminess on my skin. My reflection in the rearview mirror showed a face paler than usual, eyes wide. I stared, heart still thrumming with residual unease. Then, just as my hand reached for the ignition key, I swear I saw it. A flicker of movement in the periphery of the small rectangular mirror, just behind my reflected shoulder. My reflection's lips seemed to part slightly, poised on the edge of a word, or perhaps a grin. I slammed the engine to life and drove, propelled by the chilling certainty that distance offered no true escape. Something had followed me from the woods, lodging itself not just in memory, but in the treacherous surfaces of every reflection I might ever dare to meet. Tuesday brought the faintest rumor of abrasion, a dry, furtive sound, initially lost beneath the groans of ancient timbers, the sighing protest of plumbing within the venerable pile I called home, easily dismissed as the house's nocturnal monologue. But the insistence grew, a persistent friction that clawed its way into consciousness, seeding the chilling realization. Something lived within my walls, and it yearned for egress. Memory clings sharpest to that particular evening, late autumn unleashing a tempest, the wind a frantic percussion against the leaded glass of my inherited Victorian folly. Its warped floorboards and high, shadowed ceilings, usually sources of eccentric charm, felt conspiratorial that night, holding their breath in the gloom. Cocooned on the chaise, a novel neglected in my lap, I registered it more clearly, the faintest scritch, almost subliminal beneath the gale's fury. Head tilted, book lowered. Again, a delicate, determined friction from deep within the wall at my back. Rodents, perhaps? The house, a porous antique, had sheltered vermin before. Tomorrow, traps. I tried sinking back into the story, but the sound persisted, swelling from suggestion to insistence, a dry rasp that set my teeth on edge. Setting the book aside, drawn by morbid curiosity, I rose and approached the wall, pressing an ear to the flocked damask wallpaper, cool against my skin. The noise resolved, a measured scrape, 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 punctuated by small, distinct taps. A cold rivulet traced my spine, far too methodical for any common pest. A squirrel trapped? A desperate bird? No, a deeper instinct recoiled from such simple explanations. This felt intentional. The remainder of the night became a haunted patrol, Ilara tracking the sound's migration through the labyrinthine structure, from parlor wall to hallway partition, then skittering faintly overhead, a phantom presence always just beyond reach. Pinpointing it proved impossible. It was always just elsewhere, receding as I approached. Dawn found me frayed, afloat on caffeine, nerves thrumming like over-tightened wires in the oppressive quiet. Daylight offered flimsy rationalizations, workplace pressure, an imagination inflamed by gothic fiction and the house's inherent atmosphere. I navigated the familiar routines, consciously banishing the unsettling echoes, but dusk, bleeding indigo through the tall windows, brought it back, a faint scrabbling this time emanating from the plaster beside the humming icebox as I rinsed dinner plates. I froze, water cascading over my numb fingers, listening, utterly distinct, undeniable. Something was sharing my walls. My voice, carefully modulated against rising panic, reached Silas through the phone. Rats, he ventured, practical as ever, promising tools and company the following day. Gratitude warred with a deeper dread. That night eclipsed the first. The friction sound was amplified, relentless, a shadow clinging to my movements through the echoing rooms. Passing the landing, ascending the creaking stairs, I could have sworn a sibilance rode beneath it, a thread of whisper snatched away by the settling groans of the house. Sleep was unthinkable. I spent the hours huddled beneath the entryway chandelier, bathing the hall in stark defensive light, every creak a jolt to my overwrought system. Silas arrived mid-morning, his easy confidence faltering slightly as he crossed the threshold. "Air feels thick in here, Ilara," he murmured, brow furrowed as he surveyed the shadowed hallway. "Heavy, somehow." We embarked on a methodical invasion, peeling back rugs, scrutinizing vents, even sacrificing small squares of drywall where the sound had been most pronounced. Nothing. No droppings, no nests, no logical ingress. Just dust and the weary infrastructure of a bygone era. "Could just be the plumbing settling funny," Silas offered as he packed his kit, but conviction had fled his eyes. He'd heard it himself late that afternoon, an unmistakable, frantic scraping from an upstairs bedroom wall. We'd scrambled towards it, tools ready, only for the sound to ripple away, seemingly dissolving into the ceiling joists above like smoke. His departure left a vacuum the silence rushed to fill, but only momentarily. The scratching resumed almost instantly, a mocking persistence, as if it had patiently awaited my solitude. That evening marked a shift, a deepening of the intrusion. The scraping became a near constant auditory torment, but it was joined by heavier sounds, soft, resonant thuds, like something cumbersome shifting within the narrow voids between studs, and the whispers, no longer deniable, no longer mistakable for wind or imagination. A low conspiratorial murmur, the rhythm and inflection of dialogue just beyond the threshold of intelligibility, sometimes singular, sometimes a chorus, rustling behind the plaster like dry leaves. My call to the constabulary was a trembling confession of the inexplicable. They dispatched an officer, a woman whose calm demeanor was a temporary balm in the storm of my fear. Predictably, the house fell silent the moment she stepped inside, holding its secrets close. Sympathetic, yes, but powerless, without tangible disturbance or evidence of trespass. The days following blurred into a sleepless miasma of listening and dread. Work became impossible, my focus consumed by the maddening tenancy within my walls. I pursued every avenue, exterminators wielding chemical solutions, architectural surveyors with blueprints and levels, even a discreet inquiry to a local society dedicated to psychical research. They came, they measured, they listened, they probed. Findings, nil. Yet several departed with a shared, troubled glance back at the house's impassive facade, an unease they couldn't articulate. The scraping gnawed on, the whispers weaving a tapestry of almost meaning just beyond my grasp. Perhaps a week into the siege, standing before the bathroom mirror, splashing cold water on a face pale with exhaustion, it happened. A distinct rap, 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 sharp, deliberate, from the lath and plaster beside the basin, not settling, not pipes, a summons. Heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, I leaned in, cheek grazing the cool tile. "Hello?" The word felt absurd, a desperate whisper swallowed by the room's sudden, expectant stillness. "Is anyone there?" The reply was instantaneous, explosive. A frantic volley of knocks, a furious resurgence of scratching, overlaid now with something chillingly organic, muffled, choked cries raw with despair, as if my acknowledgement had broken a dam, loosing a torrent of anguish. They were desperate to breach the divide. I recoiled, stumbling backward against the clawfoot tub, mind scrabbling for purchase on the impossible. Yet the sounds intensified, weeping, frantic and heartbroken, punctuated by guttural phrases in no tongue I knew, a language of pure suffering. Panic detonated. I fled the house, bursting into the rain-slicked street, not halting until the corner street lamp offered its sickly yellow sanctuary beneath the bruised twilight sky. Gasping, I stared back. The house sat serene, lights blazing from windows like indifferent eyes, betraying nothing of the torment within. But its placid exterior was a lie. It pulsed with an impossible life, a hidden agony. A sterile hotel room offered little respite. The memory of those desperate sounds echoed louder than the city traffic outside. The following dawn, resolve hardened by sheer terror and a desperate need for resolution, I returned. From a neighbor, I borrowed a sledgehammer, its weight a grim comfort in my trembling hands. I planted myself in the hallway before the section of wall that had issued the summons, the epicenter of the cries. "All right," I announced to the silent plaster, the words ragged, feeling utterly unhinged, but beyond caring. "I'm opening it. Get back from the wall." A sudden frenzy of scratching erupted from within, accompanied by what sounded unnervingly like eager, sibilant whispers, a chorus of anticipation. Drawing a ragged breath that tasted of dust and desperation, I swung. The impact was brutally satisfying, plaster erupting inwards in a cloud of white powder. Again, and again, driven by a primal need to expose the source, to confront the impossible, I battered a ragged opening into the structure's guts. Choking on airborne debris, flashlight beam cutting through the haze, I peered into the cavity, heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Void. Nothing but dusty rock-wool insulation, snaking electrical conduits, and the pale reverse side of the adjoining room's wallboard. No hidden chamber, no desperate captive, no monstrous entity, nothing. Absolutely nothing. The sledgehammer slipped from my numb fingers, thudding onto the debris-strewn floorboards. And the house was utterly silent. The absence of sound was more profound, more deafening than the preceding weeks of cacophony, a silence that felt vast and watchful. Subsequent weeks saw the house dissected further. Walls were opened wholesale, floorboards lifted with crowbars. Teams of professionals scrutinized every joist and cavity, seeking hidden recesses, structural anomalies, any physical explanation for the symphony of horror I'd endured. They unearthed nothing beyond tired wiring, ancient dust, and the quiet dignity of century-old timber. Remaining was untenable. I sold the venerable pile at a significant loss, offering the new inhabitants a bewildered, hesitant account of my experiences. Their polite skepticism was palpable, overshadowed only by the allure of acquiring such unique architecture so cheaply. I fled across continents, settling into the anonymous embrace of a new-build flat, its walls thin enough to transmit the mundane dramas of neighbors, muffled arguments, late-night television, footsteps overhead. Sometimes in the deep quiet of the night, habit compels me to press an ear against the drywall, listening. Only the city hum and the predictable sounds of shared living answer. Yet, occasionally poised on the very edge of sleep, a phantom echo surfaces, the faintest scritch-scritch, dry and persistent, a chilling reminder of the impossible presence within those old Victorian walls, and the disquieting unanswered question of whether its silence truly means it ever let me go. The satellite navigation system offered a buoyant chime, a digital flourish declaring my arrival. Yet through the windscreen, beyond hands clenched white on the steering wheel, lay a geography utterly alien to Silverton. Havenwood, population 71, proclaimed the weathered sign, its paint flaking like sunburnt skin, the numerals themselves imbued with a stagnant quality, as if untouched by census or the simple passage of years. Hours I'd surrendered to the asphalt ribbon, charting a course for my cousin's nuptials in Silverton, a supposedly foolproof highway trajectory, undone somewhere in the monotonous miles by the usually steadfast GPS, now beneath a sky bleeding into bruised purples and alarming crimsons. As the sun bled out below the tree line, I found myself marooned in this hamlet, seemingly excised from time's ledger. Havenwood's primary thoroughfare unspooled before me, flanked by structures whose facades whispered of mid-century aesthetics, jarringly out of step with the present. Neon script sputtered fitfully above darkened shop fronts. The sparse figures populating the sidewalks drifted with a peculiar, dragging motion, a hesitant shuffle that strummed a discordant chord on my already frayed nerves. I guided the car to the curb, retrieving my phone, hoping for a map, A signal, some digital lifeline, nothing naturally. A weary exhalation fogged the glass. Directions then procured the archaic way. Across the street, the sundown spoon beckoned, its chrome shell radiating a tarnished luminescence in the twilight. A buzzing sign boasted, "Best pie in the county." Stepping from the vehicle, the day's residual heat wrapped around me, thick and immediate. My nape prickled as I approached. The few pedestrians had ceased their languid progress, their gazes unnervingly direct and wide, fixed upon me. My pace involuntarily quickened, the diner door yielding under a pressure born more of anxiety than intent. A discordant jangle erupted from the bell overhead, instantly arresting the room's low hum. Every occupant, and I mean every occupant, pivoted as one entity, faces impassive, optics vacant. A stark silence descended, punctuated only by the faint crackle of a wireless, emitting some brassy refrain redolent of the 1940s. My throat felt tight. "Excuse me," I managed, the words sounding thin. I seemed to be rather lost. Could anyone direct me towards Silverton? Stillness held for a beat. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, murmurs resumed. Cutlery scraped against plates, the collective attention retracting. They returned to their meals, forks lifting and descending with a disconcerting metronomic regularity. A waitress materialized beside me so suddenly I flinched. Her name badge read Agnes, her smile stretched just a fraction too taut, residing in the uncanny valley between warmth and predation. "Well now, sugar, Silverton's a fair piece from here," she crooned, her voice a treacle-thick concoction. "Why not settle yourself? Have a slice of our pie while we sort you out." Every fiber urged retreat, a frantic scramble back to the car, ignition, flight. But Agnes's eyes pinned me, radiating not benevolence, but an unnerving, quiet veracity. Before conscious thought could intervene, I occupied a booth. Before me sat a wedge of cherry pie, unbidden, unordered. Agnes lingered, that over-bright smile unwavering. "Go on now, sugar," she coaxed. "Help you think straight." I lifted the fork, less from desire than a need to placate. The filling possessed a ruby sheen that evoked, unpleasantly, something vital and freshly spilled. A tentative bite exploded on my tongue, an impossible alchemy of sweet, tart, and profound richness. Another bite followed, then another, volition dissolving in the sheer sensory overload. Through the haze of flavor, the diner's contours seemed to soften, to waver. The patron's stilted movements gained a semblance of fluidity. The radio's tune sharpened, coalescing into something hauntingly familiar. Even Agnes's smile appeared less manufactured. "See, better, isn't it?" she murmured, sliding opposite me. "So tell me, what errand brings you to our quiet corner?" I blinked, dredging my memory. Why was I here? A wedding, yes. But the thought felt distant, trivial. I don't recall exactly, I confessed. Agnes patted my hand. Her touch sent a peculiar galvanic pulse up my arm. "That's just fine, sugar. Folks often find Havenwood when they're adrift. This place, it has a knack for calling to souls in need." Her words resonated with an odd solace. The pie plate was empty. I had no recollection of finishing it. Outside, darkness had fully enveloped the town, the street now bathed in the amber glow of quaint, old-fashioned lamps. "Let me show you to the inn," Agnes proposed. "You look plumb tuckered out." I rose and followed, my limbs moving with a strange autonomy. The street, now animated with strolling couples and quiet chatter, felt different. Faces turned towards me, smiling, nodding, acknowledgments offered as if to an expected long-lost neighbor. The Whispering Pines Inn loomed, a grand Victorian edifice, incongruously majestic amidst its humbler neighbors. Ascending the steps, a wave of vertigo washed over me. Agnes's hand on my elbow was both a steadying anchor and a source of profound disquiet. "Don't you fret," her voice seemed to echo from a distance. "Everyone feels a little topsy-turvy at first. You'll settle right in." The lobby swam before me, a chiaroscuro of polished dark wood and plush crimson velvet, a fleeting impression of signing a register, of a heavy brass key pressed into my palm. Then a room. Ornate wallpaper writhed with patterns that seemed to subtly shift at the edge of vision. I sank onto the bed, head spinning, the world tilting. As oblivion claimed me, Agnes's voice whispered, disembodied nearby yet unseen. "Welcome to Havenwood, Sugar. You're home now." I awoke abruptly, sunlight lancing through unfamiliar lace curtains. A moment of pure disorientation. Where was I? How? Then the fractured memories surfaced, the wrong turn. This sequestered town, Agnes, the sundown spoon, the pie. I pushed myself upright, temples throbbing. The room was a meticulous recreation of a bygone era, antique furnishings, faded elegance. Yet an artificiality clung to it, the uncanny perfection of a stage set. Stumbling to the window, I drew back the lace. Below, the street pulsed with life, but a life displaced in time. Automobiles from the Eisenhower era glided past, their chrome fins flashing. Women in full skirts and men crowned with fedoras ambled along the pavement. The entire town was ensnared in a temporal loop. My phone. I needed help, contact with the outside. My hands searched empty pockets. A wave of cold dread washed over me as I looked down. My clothes were wrong. I wore a button-down shirt, high-waisted trousers, garments lifted directly from a vintage catalog. A crisp knock sounded. "Room service!" Agnes's voice, relentlessly cheerful. Hesitantly, I opened the door. There she stood, balancing a tray bearing steaming coffee and another slice of that pie. "Morning, sunshine," she chirped. "Figured you'd need a little something after your travels." "What is this?" I rasped, voice raw. "What's happening here? What did you do?" Agnes's smile remained immutable. Now, no need for agitation. Havenwood's just particular. A sanctuary for certain folks. Those needing a clean slate, wanting to shed their worries. And you, dear heart, looked like you carried a heavier load than most. I shook my head, battling the persistent mental fog. I didn't want this. I was just passing through. I have to get back. There's a wedding. "A wedding?" Agnes cut in, her eyes acquiring a sudden, sharp gleam. "Oh, Sugar, is that what has you in a tizzy? Why didn't you say? We adore weddings in Havenwood. Matter of fact, I believe old Mr. Hemlock's girl is tying the knot this very weekend. I'm certain they'd be thrilled for you to join in." The phrasing, The look in her eyes, it wasn't an invitation, but a statement of fact. A chill traced my spine as the true architecture of my predicament solidified. Not just eccentric, but a carefully constructed snare. And I, lost and weary, had wandered straight into its jaws. I believe I'd like to leave now, I stated, striving for a firmness I didn't feel. Agnes's smile acquired a tinge of melancholy. Oh, sugar, surely you understand. Nobody truly leaves Heavenwood. But don't you worry none. You'll grow fond of it. We all do, eventually. As if summoned, a cluster of townspeople materialized in the hallway behind her. Their smiles mirrored Agnes's precisely. Their eyes held that same passively acquisitive expression I'd noted the previous evening. Why not come downstairs? Meet everyone proper, Agnes suggested, her hand extending towards mine. We're your people now, after all. Every instinct screamed resistance, flight, a primal cry for escape. But as Agnes's fingers gently closed around my own, that strange electric current surged through me once more. Suddenly the prospect felt less horrifying. Perhaps this was it, the belonging I hadn't known I craved. A life stripped bare, unburdened by the frantic pace of the world I'd left behind. Agnes led me towards the staircase, the assembled townsfolk falling into step behind us. A silent, smiling procession. The last vestiges of my former self seemed to dissolve with each descending step. Havenwood hadn't been the destination sought, but perhaps, just perhaps, it was the destination required. Outside, the sun cast long, benign shadows across a street, alive with the perfect choreography of a flawless 1950s morning. Stepping out into that bright, uncanny tableau, Agnes's hand warm in mine, my new family flanking me, I found I couldn't quite recall why I'd ever entertained the notion of leaving. Beyond the slumbering town of Oak Haven, Nebraska, where a serpentine dirt track surrendered to the horizon, stood the solitary farmhouse. I harbored a peculiar affection for structures surrendered to time. The prospect of coaxing life back into forgotten corners, seeing it advertised, a silhouette against endless sky, felt like destiny, a canvas awaiting restoration. The price felt right. Its bones whispered of character, and so, ignorant of the spectral tapestry woven into its timbers, I acquired it. My arrival coincided with a Saturday's zenith. The sun, a fierce eye in the cerulean expanse. Immense fields, fertile tapestries of corn and wheat, embraced the property, their earthy perfume mingling with the scent of nascent growth. The house itself, a two-storied sentinel, shed its white paint like fractured memories onto the weathered siding. Vacant eyes where windows should have been were blinded by crude boards. The porch slumped, weary from decades of solitude. My truck's tires chewed the gravel drive, the sound an abrupt intrusion into the profound quiet. Approaching the main entrance, an inexplicable tremor coursed through me, the air clinging colder here, defying the day's warmth. The heavy timber door resisted, then groaned its protest as I wrestled it open, the sound swallowed by the vacant yard. Inside, gloom reigned. Dust motes danced in the sparse shafts of sunlight, piercing boarded-up windows, illuminating a world draped in cobwebs and neglect. I stepped across the threshold, the thud of my toolbox near the staircase, echoing the house's emptiness. The front room sprawled, dominated by a cavernous hearth. Phantoms draped in white sheets occupied the space where furniture once sat. Tugging a shroud from a chair revealed a dilapidated sofa beneath, its fabric exhaling the cloying aroma of mildew that made my nostrils flare. My intention was to cleanse, to banish the decay, but an impulse stayed my hand. Across the room, a door stood partially open, an invitation into deeper shadows. Drawn by an insistent curiosity, I pushed it wider. A constricted hallway stretched toward the farmhouse's rear, its walls adorned with askew portraits. Unfamiliar faces frozen in time, their gazes unsettlingly direct. One photograph arrested me. A family posed before this very house, their smiles brittle, their eyes like hollows pleading for something unseen. I forced the unease away, turning back to the task at hand. Hours dissolved into the rhythm of scrubbing floors, wiping away layers of grime. As the sun bled orange across the sills, painting the dusty air in hues of farewell, I sought respite on the worn sofa. Silence enveloped the structure, profound save for the sporadic creaks of settling timbers. Then a distinct sound from above, footfalls traversing the aged floorboards. My pulse quickened. I rose, gaze fixed on the shadowed staircase. The steps descended, growing louder, closer. Retrieving a flashlight from my tools, I ascended cautiously, each tread groaning beneath my weight, amplifying the unnerving quiet. The upper landing unfurled into a corridor flanked by tightly shut doors. "Hello," I called out, the word absorbed by the stillness. "Is anyone here?" Only silence answered. Drawing a ragged breath, I fought to quell the rising tide of nerves. The footsteps ceased abruptly. I advanced down the hall, the flashlight's beam slicing the oppressive dark. At the corridor's terminus, a door hung slightly ajar, a sliver of light escaping from beneath. Pushing it open revealed a small bedchamber, chaotic with an unmade bed and clothes strewn carelessly. A tarnished mirror mounted on the wall offered back a fractured reflection, bisected by a jagged crack. Moving closer, I wiped at the grime clouding the glass. My own face stared back, yet subtly wrong. And then, coalescing in the silver depths behind my shoulder, a tenebrous figure materialized in the doorway. I whirled around. Nothing. The air grew thin. My heart hammered against my ribs. Turning back to the mirror, the apparition had vanished. Retreating from the room, a conviction settled. It was time to depart for the night. As I descended the stairs, a whisper, ephemeral yet distinct, brushed against my ear. "Save me," I froze, straining to hear. It came again, nearer this time, intimate. "Save me." Raw panic surged. Snatching my belongings, I bolted for the front door. My hand reached the knob just as the heavy oak slammed shut with resounding finality. I wrenched at the handle, desperate, but it held fast, immovable. The whispers multiplied, swirling around me now, insistent. "Save me." I scrambled to a window, heaving at the sash, but it refused to yield. Louder now, the voices pressed in, a chorus of spectral pleas. A palpable presence filled the room, heavy and watchful. Recoiling from the window, I forced a semblance of calm, my thoughts frantic, seeking egress. The basement entrance tucked away near the rear. Perhaps another route existed there. Flashlight clutched tight, I navigated toward the back of the house, finding the door there now swinging open, silently beckoning. I slipped through into the cool embrace of the night air. a stark relief from the suffocating tension within. Without a backward glance, I sprinted down the dirt track toward the haven of my truck. Inside, doors locked. I slumped against the steering wheel, gasping for breath. The farmhouse loomed behind, a dark mass against the deepening twilight, returned to its inscrutable silence. The engine roared to life, a defiant sound in the stillness. As I pulled away, a glance in the rearview mirror revealed only the house, a stark silhouette against the star-dusted canvas of night. Dawn found me returning, compelled by an unyielding need to unearth the truth veiled within those walls. I drove back toward the farmhouse as the sun climbed, bathing the quiescent fields in the crisp promise of morning. Parking the truck, I approached the house with trepidation, the daylight offering little solace against the lingering anxiety. The front door yielded easily this time. The main room appeared unchanged, yet the atmosphere felt subtly altered. Fresh footprints not my own marred the dust, leading toward the shadowed hallway. My heart hammered anew as I followed their path to the rear door, still ajar, an open invitation. Passing through, I located the basement door. It was unlocked. I descended the narrow steps, the flashlight beam cutting a path through the subterranean chill. The air hung thick with the musk of damp earth and decay. Tools lay scattered, spectral outlines of furniture huddled in corners, but my attention snagged on a small chest resting in the center of the earthen floor. Approaching it, the light revealed intricate carvings, time-worn sigils etched into its dark wood. Kneeling, I lifted the heavy lid. Inside lay a trove of brittle letters and faded photographs. Sifting through them, the narrative of the previous occupant, a man named Arthur Finch, began to emerge. The letters spoke of mounting debts, of familial discord. One missive alluded obliquely to a disappearance, Arthur's wife, Evelyn, who had vanished years prior, leaving only questions in her wake. The photographs depicted a seemingly content family, now irrevocably shadowed by the enigma of Evelyn's fate. A cold dread seeped into me. The house guarded secrets Arthur could not or would not divulge. As my fingers brushed the final letter, the basement door slammed shut above. I recoiled, the flashlight beam sputtering erratically. The whispers returned, amplified, desperate. "Save me!" they echoed, reverberating off the cold stone walls. Clutching the letters, I scrambled to my feet, mind racing to connect the fragments. A subtle shift in the shadows behind me. I turned. A form coalesced from the gloom, standing in the corner. It was Evelyn, her face spectral white, her eyes hollow voids of sorrow. She drifted toward me, her passage across the concrete floor utterly silent. I instinctively stepped back. "What is it you want?" I stammered, my voice a thin tremor in the charged air. She extended a translucent hand, passing through mine like mist. "Find the truth," she breathed, the words a fragile plea. "Save me." Understanding dawned. Her essence was tethered here, yearning for resolution. I nodded, vowing silently to unravel the mystery of her vanishing. Evelyn's form wavered, then dissolved, leaving the basement in its former quietude. The door above clicked open. I fled up the stairs, a newfound resolve solidifying within me. The ensuing weeks became a deep dive into Arthur Finch's shrouded past. At the Oakhaven Library, I navigated microfilmed archives, searching newspaper columns and public records for any trace of Evelyn. details remained elusive, though I unearthed a faded report mentioning a suspicious vehicle observed near the farm on the night she disappeared. The trail went cold. No arrests were ever made. Convinced the house itself held further clues, I resolved to search again. One evening, as twilight painted long skeletal shadows across the property, I returned, flashlight beam cutting through the dusk. Descending once more into the basement's tense stillness, I revisited the chest, scrutinizing its contents for overlooked details. Tucked behind a cluster of rusted tools, my fingers brushed against wood that felt different, a hidden compartment. Inside lay a small, dust-laden journal. Opening its fragile pages revealed Arthur's cramped script. He wrote of escalating paranoia, of being watched by someone unknown, untrusted. The final entry was a frantic scrawl, mentioning Evelyn's disappearance, his own impotence in protecting her. A surge of purpose galvanized me. Someone knew what happened to Evelyn. My inquiries led me to the older residents of Oakhaven, seeking anyone who remembered the Finches. An elderly woman, a Mrs. Gable, consented to speak. She recalled witnessing a heated argument between Arthur and a neighbor, Silas Croft, on the very night Evelyn vanished. Locating Silas in a neighboring town, I arranged a meeting. He was older now, his face a roadmap of years and buried regrets. I approached him carefully, presenting the journal, explaining my quest. Recognition shadowed by profound sorrow flickered in his eyes. Arthur was decent, Silas murmured, his voice thick with memory. But Evelyn, she carried secrets too. They aimed to leave, you see. Start anew somewhere far off. That night, things spun out of control. I never meant, but Evelyn, she was just gone. I pressed for specifics, but Silas shook his head, his gaze distant. It's all fog now, can't recall more. Though lacking definitive proof, I felt palpably closer to the core of the mystery. Returning to the farmhouse, Evelyn's spectral presence seemed to pulse around me, an unseen encouragement. I decided a simple ceremony might offer her spirit solace. Arranging candles in a circle within the basement's heart, I placed the letters and journal at the center. Softly, I recounted Evelyn's story, voicing my desire to help her find release. As I spoke, the air plunged colder, the whispers swelling, filling the subterranean space. Evelyn manifested again, her form sharper this time, less ethereal. "Thank you," she whispered, the sound imbued with an unmistakable sense of release. The basement door swung open on its own accord, and the oppressive weight that had permeated the house seemed to evaporate. A quiet sense of accomplishment settled over me. I had helped her find peace. Leaving the farmhouse that night, it felt transformed, no longer haunted but imbued with a resonant tranquility. In the weeks that followed, the strange phenomena ceased entirely. The whispers faded into silence, and Evelyn's presence lingered only as a poignant memory, stripped of its fear. I threw myself into the renovation, breathing life back into the structure, fulfilling a dream Arthur and Evelyn never realized. One evening, while putting the finishing touches on the main room, my gaze fell upon a photograph standing proudly on the mantelpiece. It was the family portrait I'd found earlier, now cleaned and carefully displayed. A gentle warmth spread through me, a certainty that Evelyn's spirit was finally truly at rest. The farmhouse, once a repository of sorrow and secrets, began its transformation into a home resonant with hope. Looking back, it felt as though the house itself had selected me, drawn me into its spectral narrative. Assisting Evelyn had not only resolved the lingering question of her fate, but had unexpectedly granted me a sense of purpose. The farmhouse stood, a monument to its past, now inextricably woven with the fabric of my present. The restoration took months, yet I never felt truly alone within its walls. Faint sounds sometimes surfaced, the ghost of a footstep, a murmur on the edge of hearing, but they no longer inspired dread. They were merely echoes, gentle reminders of the journey undertaken. I learned to coexist with the history embedded in the place, understanding that while some secrets demand oblivion, others cry out for the light. Ultimately, the old farmhouse became a place of healing for Evelyn and for myself. It stood as a testament to perseverance, to the quiet courage required to confront the unknown. The secrets of the abandoned farm were finally quieted, making space for new stories to bloom. Standing on the porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the vast, whispering fields, a profound peace settled within me. The farmhouse, once synonymous with mystery and fear, was now simply home, breathing with life and memory. I knew with unshakable certainty that embracing the challenge, unearthing the truth, had been the right path. The shadows of the past no longer haunted. They guided me toward a future illuminated by hard-won light.